Welcome back to the Sleeping Grush podcast. I'm Matt.
And I am still Jon.
Well, I know they're working on it, Jon. I've seen a lot of stuff come across
I've had an idea about it, though, Matt.
Have you? What you got?
Yeah, you know how in the Sleeping Grush, the idea is that creatively, you and I are two old codgers in the back of the Sleeping Grush. You know, we're the two guys from Statler and Waldorf, the two
Statler
Muppets.
and Waldorf, right?
We're in the back of the Sleeping Grush, making fun of all the free blades that come in. So what if we introduce ourselves? And I'm going to suggest this, and let's see what people think. So please give us your opinion on our various social media. You introduce yourself as Lore Master Matt, and I introduce myself as Phelan Jon.
I love it.
Let's see what the crew thinks. So tell us your opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I love it.
All right. Well, we're here.
We are here. Well, we're here is kind of an interesting word. If you guys are hearing our voices as kind of disembodied voices hanging in the void, there's a reason for that. We're all in different locations today. Jager is in one place, I'm at my home, and Jon is in Maine. So we're kind of scattered across the countryside, but we are still coming to you, getting the Sleeping Grush podcast done, ready to go. And we've got everything worked out, we hope, getting all of this. So we are brought to you today, as always, by the Cardboard Corner Cafe, now with two locations, one in Overland Park and one at the Lenexa Public Market. Eat, drink, game, the Cardboard Corner Cafe. Well, Jon, we got an interesting situation here. We're almost to Adepticon. As of this recording, we're recording on the 27th of February. So we're under a month out. We're about 3 weeks out from Adepticon. We've got so many things going on. So much that we want to talk about, but can't quite yet. And other things that we've talked about, and we're just going to be running into the ground at that point. So today I kind of want to switch gears a little bit. And I want to talk about one of our factions, the Grular.
Yeah, and we're going to do that, I think, because factions was high on the list of things we asked people about when we said what kind of base subjects. We'll have things come up from time to time that are, current events, whatever. But what are we going to have that's, baseline? And factions was high on the list. And I think we talked about doing it in introduction order, right?
Yeah. We talked about...
They came into the game, yeah. So.
Yeah. And we've talked about Falkar. And...
who weren't first, but we picked them because they were first in terms of when they were developed, when I made them.
Right.
Originally. Right.
And we talked about the Trazerites. We talked about the idea of enemies.
Yep. Villains, right?
Yep. Villains, right. And today, there's a couple of reasons I want to talk about the Grular, but we'll kind of get into that as we go through. Jon knows where I'm coming from on this. So who are the Grular, Jon?
The Grular are tribes, Simker tribes. So we have to talk about ancestry, there are, and we're trying to get away from the use of the word race, right? That's an industry-wide thing. We're trying to look at not doing that. So the ancestry of these people they're originally from Semidia, the country all the way out on the extreme eastern edge of the continent, which is a land bordered on this western side by a volcanic mountain range, and on the eastern side by a very turbulent, violent ocean with tsunamis and earthquakes and storms, typhoons. So
sounds like a recipe for disaster movies.
Yeah, exactly. It's a persistent disaster movie. So those folks were constantly trying to find. Many of those folks constantly trying to find better places to live. But from a meta standpoint, originally on the old school, I assume we want to talk about this, Matt, the development of it, the practical development of it, where it started.
Absolutely.
From, right? So here I'm in high school. I got a map. It ends on all four sides, right? And I am a amateur student of history So as a person who has an ancestry that goes to, Europe, right? The eastern edge of the map is, Attila the Hun, right?
Right. Right.
Um, the Horse tribes and threats of the Mongols and whatever. So I was influenced by that as a kid, and so I had these raiders, these plunderers, and I was into all those. I was into studying all the types of people, the Central Asian Horse tribes and Visigoths and Ostrogoths and whatever Vandals. It was all fascinating cultures to me. And the Comanche as well.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Right. Those cultures fascinate me. So we had, I had that sitting on the edge of the map. Once we went to go and make it all real, we needed a reason why these folks were where they were, who they were, right? But I didn't have that. It was just, if your adventurer wandered off the right hand side of the map, you got attacked by 1,000 horsemen, right? Um, so, but as the map grew and we expanded eastwards, we needed a reason for these guys. So we have the people that are um, migrating over the mountains to get away from all these troubles, these disasters, these natural disasters. And this is the first group, I want to say, over the mountains. Am I get that right?
I think so, John.
This is the first Semidian migration. So I think if you go to World Anvil and you look up the Sultan Committee, you'll see that these guys are the first ones to go over the mountains. So, so they're out there, and the place that they go to is not suited to urban civilization. It's suited to nomadic tribes. So they leave and they go to this place, as nomads, and find that their setup, their culture, their way of traveling over the mountains and getting there turned out to be a good way to live, given the geography of where they went to. So that's how they start.
Awesome. Awesome. And so how did they come into the game Free Blades? Because that's an interesting story. We've talked about that kind of
a
couple times before, but
so I know we've talked about this. We knew we had all these factions out there, and originally, like we said before, we were going to be a role-playing game. So the first set of models that we made were basically a test model for each ancestry, each faction, each country. Right. So we had a Falcaran model, and we had a Trazrite model, and we had a whatever. We had a Grular horseman, which is now what we would know as Marauder 1. Right.
Right.
And when we decided to have our first game be the skirmish game and not be the role-playing game, the mission was to take what models we had and get 4 factions onto the table as quickly as possible from the models that we had available, right? And it was at that point that we were, we have, we try to make these factions as interesting as we possibly can, right? We don't want them to be perfectly matched to some historical Earth counterpart. But we like to have the basics, kind of lined up so you're a little bit familiar. You get some context. You can be grounded and kind of move off from that baseline. And these were the folks that we decided to have allied with the demons.
Right.
And that's why there's a Gudarl in the starter box for the Grular currently.
Right.
So, and the reason why is because they start to eye these other nomadic and non-civilized people begin to civilize and start looking at them and go, oh, that looks good. I don't have to be, constantly in the saddle, constantly moving, constantly hunting. I can live more comfortably, and, in many Earth cultures, there's 2 paths there. There's a lot of paths. There's 2 basic paths. You stay with that culture because tradition, you prefer it, a number of reasons. Or, some of your people turn to the more agriculture-based, urbane way of living,
Yeah.
And so the Grular are constantly, because they're the land that they're on is not fertile, right? It's not as plagued by disaster as Semidia, but it is not, Kansas farmland, right?
Right.
So if you want
we've
some of
seen
that,
that.
you want some of that, you got to go west.
Right.
So,
Right. And we've seen that motif play out before with the Urtigar, because when we talked about Falkar, of course, that the Falkaran were Urtigar, and they decided that they wanted a different way of life and came over the Moonshadow Mountains there, and started to civilize, for lack of a better term. And
right, but they didn't do so homogeneously, right?
no, they did
Some
so.
of
They
them, yeah, same thing.
right,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So that's an interesting piece of anthropology and history that is intertwined into the game. And one of the reasons that I love Freeblade so much, because it draws on those analogs and it plays them out in the lore. So I love that aspect of things.
yeah. It's fun to put your own twist on that sort of story.
Yeah.
You have something that you kind of recognize, and you tweak a little bit, and
Right.
it becomes your own story. While somebody will still recognize. Very rarely do you come across a first. Oh my God, I've never heard anything like that before. What is that?
Right.
Not very often.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think our mind attaches to things better when we have some sort of a grasp of
yeah,
it historically
I think
or
so.
in our culture.
When you're grounded in context, it does seem to make it a little bit more comfortable. Then you can play with the edges,
Yeah.
and not have the entire thing be so unfamiliar. You're constantly trying to catch up mentally.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the theory. Anyway, it's a theory we're playing.
Yep. So tell me a little bit more about the interplay between the Grular and the demons. From the lore, we
Yeah.
understand why we did that at first and how they came together, but tell us how that plays out in the lore.
Well, the basic story there is the alternate reality that the demons are from is primarily unpleasant. And so, not like any other faction on the world of Phalon, surface of Phalon, the Grular find themselves to be in a similar situation. Many of us Grular would really rather live somewhere else.
Right.
So they have that in common. And as you know, people know that are following the lore. They know that the demons of Carolon, many of them, most of them, are trying to come through and take over some part of Phalon for their own because it's better. It's more a more comfortable, less hostile environment. And so you can make this grand deal. The theory is that the Grular people can make a grand deal with the demons. You help us take some other part of Phalon to live in. You can have ours, which looks to the demons like beachfront property.
Right. Right.
So that's the idea, and that's going to play out in a big story we're going to start telling here in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that towards the end of our conversation here, because
Okay,
that's
we'll do. Yep,
that,
that makes sense.
yeah, that's definitely a big piece of the Grular themselves. Uh, so the figures that we have now in the Grular range, there's a mix of mounted and dismounted and demon figures, and they work together, right, as far as the design elements, and we've got this faction, but we're looking to do something else with it. We're looking to develop it a bit, and obviously I'm not on the design side, so I really can't speak to this very well. But Jon, how are we reimagining the Grular, and how is that going to play out in our production over the next several years?
So a little bit of a reveal here, huh? Yeah,
Just a
I'm
little
cool
bit,
with
yeah.
that. Sure, I can do that. Yeah, I'll break that system. I'll make Julie and Jennifer lose their minds. No problem. We'll see if they listen to this. I'm pretty sure.
That's right.
Pretty sure Jennifer's a regular listener, so we'll see. So if you think about the Grular starter set, let's talk about that for a minute. So you have the Korkan and the Warlock and the Marauder who's on a horse, and the Gadar, the four heroes. The Warlock's the caster, the Korkan is the leader, Marauder is on a horse with a bow, and the Gadar is a demon. And then the two followers, the Crag and the Bludgeoneer. You don't get the feel of the mounted hordes that the Grular are, right?
Right.
Now, even the cultures like the Hunnic cultures and the Central Asian and the Mongol cultures had soldiers on foot, warriors on foot. Usually, if they had like a caste system or a second class citizen, it would be somebody like that. It wouldn't be, or slave in some cases, if they were a slave taking culture. So that could be your followers, but most everybody else was on a horse, and we cut on to that, but we didn't want to wait to show the Grular until we could, make that happen as a reality.
Right.
So things have changed, and we have a lot of capabilities that we did not have when we first released the Grular. And I think if you look at the Grular across their models, and they were, initially going to be very demon heavy, and that's how we were going to kind of, tell their story was half demon, half Grular. But there's a lot of fun to being just Grular,
Oh, absolutely.
But you couldn't for most of its history as a product line. You couldn't because there weren't enough models to support a fully Grular force. Mm-hmm. So the Grular packaging, especially the cover of the starter set, didn't sell the idea of who these people really were, or more importantly, who we really wanted them to be. Right. And who we wanted, how we wanted people to identify with. So over time, we are going to let the Grular line kind of sell out, the metal, because it's mostly metal right now. And as that plays out, we are going to, I'm going to use the word retool. It's not the right word, but we're going to retool them so that the starter set is entirely mounted and entirely Grular.
Right. So
they will be able to take a limited number of deals. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's fine. A couple of years ago, I mean, it was pretty soon, right after I joined the company and it really started getting involved. We released several new mounted Grular models at Adepticon. And I'm trying to think of how long ago it was. It may have been 4 or 5 years ago when we did that.
Yeah,
we released the Korcon, the Impaler, and the Warlock all at once. And I remember thinking at the time, holy cow, right? We're getting exactly where we want to go with the Grular. We're getting them to that nomadic horse feel that we were really looking at when I started reading the literature, so I love that, and we're going further than that. We're gonna do more. We're definitely getting them into the starter box together.
Right. Yeah, I believe now I might be talking out of turn, so let's not hold either Matt or I to some of the things we're about to say. This is the direction. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. This is the direction. The idea would be, and I believe the point values would support me, depending on some adjustments, that a mounted Korcon, a mounted Warlock, an Impaler, and 2 Raiders fit in a starter box. So you'd have 5 models instead of 6, but you'd be entirely mounted, and you'd be at 150. Right. Yeah. And then your look of your faction would feel like who they were really intended to be in the first place.
Right.
The challenge is, if you are going to, and this was something that was more of a deal early on than it is now, but if you're going to be playing on an environment that's interior, or heavily urban, then your mounted models aren't going to be as big a help. They're going to be, you might be behind the power curve a little bit competitively, right?
Right.
And this is something that's really interesting to me. When we play tested the game originally, 10 years ago, whatever, we did a lot with underground locales and with, heavily urbanized, something at least Nephidim, or better, or more. Yeah.
Right.
And that was something we wanted to make sure we had all the rules for jumping and crossing gaps and climbing and all that sort of thing, and going downstairs and knocking down a door. And really, as much as the rules have always allowed for that, that is not what the players generally choose to do, for whatever reason. And so we're here to support our players, right? I mean,
right.
if that's how they typically do through the game, you'll have that available. And I do think, by the way, I've been thinking about this. Down the road, one of our campaigns needs to be underground. Right?
I agree.
But
I agree.
Separate subject. We'll throw that in there and drop that bomb.
That's right.
But I think that since most of these games that we see take place outdoors, a lot of that is mitigated. Now, there's still some things that might challenge a mounted model, even in a above ground scenario space, especially with some of the way that some of the scenarios are designed. And we have been working on some modifications to make them more overall competitive. They don't fit in this small spaces, right? Because they're on 50 mil bases, right?
Right.
And when you're mounted, you can't conduct a special action unless you're on hold. So grabbing things, loot markers, whatever, objective, is a little tougher in some scenarios.
Yeah.
So, and you also have the challenge of the Marauder is not a fighter hero, as a archer hero.
Right. Right.
And so a mounted Grular force built around the Marauder is not, going to be in a stand up fight with, Haredell or whoever, right? Kazard. Mm-hmm. So you have some challenges there, and we're working on some things. Like some have already sort of made their way into the game system. The Marauder has a veteran upgrade to get Death Rider, so we can pick up item on the move. Right. And other things like that to allow, these things not to suffer significant disadvantages to other back for gameplay. I do think that this ought to come with, like we have a dismounted raider, and a dismounted, a dismounted marauder, etc. That we have some models that don't have a dismounted component yet. They don't have a dismounted stat line. But I think in the Grular case, they ought to all have them, because if you're going to take a fully mounted force, there just might be some situations where you need to get off, or dismount. And well, the other may be true, but that's not for this
right
family friendly podcast. That's why, for example, the dismounted Marauder is the same point value as the mounted Marauder. Right? Yeah, because what we wanted was, when we were play testing this, when we played indoors, when we played where the environment was a dungeon, right? And the Grular player came to the table for round 2 in an event, for example, that had a dungeon and underground. Well, here's this guy's Marauder, right, from his starter box. And what's that going to do, right? But if he takes a dismount, he's not losing any value,
Yeah.
And we'll probably have to have something similar, and at least enough places that, you could have a well-constructed competitive list. It's not all about competition, but you have to take into account, enough.
Absolutely.
So that's the thinking there. So we are moving towards that. And we have the opportunity, because we are shifting from metal to plastic. As we shift from metal to plastic, we are presented with opportunities to say, we want that model type in our game, but we're not going to use that sculpt, right?
Yes.
We're gonna have a Krang, but we're not going to have the Krang we had. We're going to have a Raider, but we're not going to have a Raider we had. We're going to abandon that particular sculpt for whatever reason, and do that differently,
Right.
And some are easy to convert. Some we could take the metal, use those masters, and make a sidecast mold, and some it doesn't work out, And so we have to talk about it, right? We have to talk about Jennifer's affiliation with the National You Will Not Misrepresent a Horse Association.
Right? Yeah, she's not just a member, but I believe the president and maybe the executor general.
Yeah, I think she's the all-powerful empress for life. I don't think so. These the original horses that for example, the Marauder and Marauder 2, and even to some extent Impaler, some other horses in our line do not meet our new art director is, well, she's not new, right? But new to the models that we're talking about. Right?
Yes.
She has come on board after those models were made, and she has a very exacting standard for how horses are represented. And these do not cut the mustard. So since we're going to remake them anyway, let's take advantage of that and build them into this story, that we're talking about.
Absolutely. So. And while we make fun of this often, her standards on horses are amazing and have produced some incredible models so far.
I wouldn't even have thought it was that, as a person who's painted way too many horses. Right. I mean, I paint historicals as well. So I've got, Bavarian cavalry and Roman, Clipinari, whatever. I've got horses for days, more horses than I ever would have wanted to paint. I wouldn't have believed it made that much of a difference. She's maybe a believer.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You do take some care with the sculpture of the horse like you do with the person, and it makes a difference. The beautiful models. So, she's right to be on that path as far as I'm concerned. So we're here to support her and bring those new models. Since we're going to make those new models, let's put them into the game in a different way that supports the story better.
Right, and make fun of her when we get the opportunity.
Yeah, always.
Always, right. All right, so one last question. Yes. One last question as we come down to the end here. The Grular have a very interesting story that's going to develop over the next few years with DGS. I don't want to ruin all of it. We've talked about it before, though. So let's talk about where they're going and what part they play in that.
So, as we've talked about before, Phelan has got a couple of very strong themes, especially for its villains. The idea that man is monster enough. So, you don't have to have a beholder in every cellar to have an interesting adventure and villains that are, because if anybody didn't believe a villain makes his story, they have not met either Tom Hiddleston's Loki or Heath Ledger's Joker, right?
Oh,
you don't need to say any more than that to convince somebody how important a good villain is to a great story.
Right.
So we needed a villain. Compelling villains have great reasons for what they're doing. It's just a little hard to write a great story nowadays where the big bad is not the big bad.
Right, he's a mustache twirler.
Or a vaporous Dark Lord of I just hate everything.
Right.
So the Grular just want to have what these other people have. So are they villains? That's the kind of story we want to tell, right?
Yeah.
They are going to make a deal with their new demon allies, and they are going to come west. And that's going to spark a continent-spanning coming down the road. And what's fun about that, well, there's not a lot of things that are fun about that, but one of the big deals is that's the original background story of Phelan that I've personally been working on for, 25, 30 years. And it's where the Bright Sword comes into play, the name of our role play.
Right, that's awesome.
So they're going to be, as we are moving our story forward, now we've started to get to the point where we've matched, synced up our timeline and are moving the tale of Phelan forward in the lore. And that's going to get even more and more clear to people as time goes on. In a couple of years, we're going to unleash that conflict. We're going to be building up to it until then. With the stories that we tell, and then we're going to set this bad boy free, and it's going to be, So we're kind of in a.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, there's pieces of that in play even now.
Already, yeah.
Things that are in the background that we haven't revealed as being part of that story yet, but are moving towards that story and are little pieces that are getting into place that are going to surprise people and really start pushing that narrative forward as we get closer to that event in the timeline.
Right. Yep. We're really looking forward to telling that tale.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All kinds of story arcs and campaigns and things that are going to be coming out of that attached to it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's going to be a huge time to be a Free Blades player, to be a Brightsword player, any of the other games we release between now and then. You know, it's going to be a fantastic time, and it's really going to bring culmination to everything that we've done since we became a company, and the stories that
yeah,
they've been weaving, and the figures that we've put out, and these things that we've been doing. So that's going to be really, really cool. John, thank you for elaborating on that. We're coming down to the end of the
I'm
time.
going to add
Yeah,
just one thing real quick. You
shoot.
can't tell the story of the Bright Sword War with just one dragon. Okay, back to Matt.
I love it. I love it. Mic drop.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. All right. So, John, how you feeling about this long distance thing? I think we got the hang of it here.
We're about to. I haven't heard any. You guys are idiots turning it off from Jager, our producer. So I think we made it through, right?
I think
Seems like
we've done it.
I think we
Folks,
did. Okay.
thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us. If you have any comments or anything you'd like to hear, by all means, put it in the Sleeping Grush channel on Discord. We'd love to hear from you. Love to hear what you think of the programs. So until next time, we'll see you around the table.
Till Sakava.